Valentino Rossi, born on the 16th of February 1979, is generally regarded as the greatest motorcycle racer of all time. He started 376 Grand Prix, won 115 of them, 89 of which have come in the Premier class, recorded 232 podiums, and amassed an unprecedented 5,055 World Championship points. Just after the turn of the millennium, between the years 2001 and 2005, he won 5 straight MotoGP World Championships in a row. He then won 2 more in 2008 and 2009, giving him 7 world titles in all, with only one man having more to his name, that being Giacomo Agostini with 8, who raced in the 1960s and 70s. Despite Rossi having won fewer titles, he's still regarded by most as the greatest of all time. And for the purposes of this video, we're not going to count the likes of Agostini and Hailwood in the GOAT conversation due to their era being so far removed from today's era of Grand Prix motorcycle racing. For example, only 10 riders would start each race, compared to well over 20 in today's racing. Second, riders would race in multiple classes during the same season, so Agostini and Hailwood would race in the 500cc, 350cc and 250cc World Championship all at the same time, which is absolutely unthinkable for the likes of Marquez or Rossi to do the same thing today. Finally, perhaps most importantly, far fewer people went racing in the 60s and 70s compared to today, meaning the total talent pool was much smaller than what you'd see today in 2018. As a result, the level of competition on the highest stage is far greater today than in the old era. Racing has always been and will always be a fairly expensive sport, and even though motorcycle racing is considerably less expensive than car racing, it still isn't cheap by any stretch. Since the 60s, average salaries have increased significantly, and this combined with greatly increased media coverage on television and the emergence of social media allowing fans to interact and feel more connected with their heroes has allowed a far greater number of people to get into motorcycle racing than in the 60s. It follows that when a substantially greater amount of people participate in a sport, the average skill level also increases substantially, allowing the MotoGP grid to be more competitive now than ever before. When Ago and Hailwood were racing, it was commonplace for the first and second place riders to be separated by a gap of over a minute, something that would never be seen in today's races. For all these reasons, it really is not fair to compare Rossi, Lorenzo, Stoner or Marquez with the likes of Agostini and Hailwood. Now, over the last decade or so, it would have been considered almost sacrilegious to suggest that any other modern era racer would be considered on the same level as Rossi, who has deservedly attained demigod-like status across the motorcycle racing community. However, in 2013, a certain Spaniard from Cervera came along and really threw the cat amongst the pigeons. Since then, the MotoGP record book has rapidly started to become the biography of Marc Marquez. His first race victory in Austin, just 2 races into his MotoGP career, prompted Nick Harris, former MotoGP lead commentator, to say that we could be looking at the biggest thing to hit MotoGP since Rossi himself arrived in the Premier class 13 years ago. He was correct. Marquez's Grand Prix career began even earlier than Rossi's, with Marc making his 125cc debut at the age of just 15. Titles in the junior and intermediate classes in 2010 and 2012 respectively, along with Stoner's decision to retire at the end of the 2012 season, meant that Marquez's opportunity to move into the Premier class would arrive in 2013, with Marc taking the empty seat left behind by Stoner at Repsol Honda. He instantly became a superstar within his first season with the big boys when he became the first person since Kenny Roberts in 1978 to win the Premier Class title at the first attempt. In doing so, he also became the youngest ever winner of a MotoGP title at the age of just 20. In 2014, he had an astonishing season in which he won 13 of the 18 races, a new record, and won the first 10 races of the season in a row. Some other records he broke during his first year included becoming the first rider ever to win at Laguna Seca on the first attempt and becoming the youngest rider ever to record back-to-back victories in the Premier class. He followed that up with 2 more titles in 2016 and 2017 to cement his status as the best racer in the world at the present moment. With Marquez odds-on favourite to retain his world title in 2018, could it finally be time to consider the possibility that when the Spaniard eventually hangs up his leathers, he may have equalled or even eclipsed the charismatic Italian? So that brings us to the debate. First, let's look at a comparison between how Marquez and Rossi fared in the MotoGP class in their first 5 completed seasons, as that is how many Marquez has currently completed to this point. As you can see from the figures, the career trajectories to this point are incredibly similar, with both riders winning the title 4 out of 5 times. Rossi has a few more victories and podiums, and Marquez has quite a few more poles. Just out of interest, Marquez's 4 poles in 2018, which take his total tally to 49, is already a MotoGP record. And the similarities don't end there. Both Marquez and Rossi are aggressive riders who are strong on the brakes, possess excellent racecraft, are brilliant at maintaining a consistent pace lap after lap, even on worn tyres, and both perform exceptionally well under pressure. However, Marquez isn't just a reincarnation of Rossi, as there are notable differences between the two. Most striking is the difference in riding styles. Marquez revolutionized the sport by introducing an extreme riding style, whereby riders utilize a technique which exhibits exaggerated cornering lean angles of up to 64 degrees from vertical. In addition, they use an even more exaggerated body position, whereby the rider's entire body is hanging way off the bike, with the rider's elbow scraping along the ground, which brought the term elbow down into public consciousness. Rossi, on the other hand, being a rider who entered Grand Prix racing in the late 90s, initially used to use the old school riding style, where riders didn't reach the same heavy lean angles, instead using lean angles only slightly greater than what you might see in the fast group on a track day. Additionally, the riders' bodies, especially their heads and upper bodies, did not hang off the motorcycle anywhere near as far as what is seen today. In order to remain competitive, however, Rossi has had to adapt his riding style to make it more similar to the style deployed by the current crop of young MotoGP riders. However, even today, he still doesn't hang off the bike as much as Marquez, Lorenzo, or Pol Espargaro do, for example. Other differences between the two riders include their overtaking style. Rossi's overtakes are more beautiful and poetic, whereas Marquez's are more forceful and hyper-aggressive. At the same time though, both riders can be equally ruthless, for example on the final lap at the final corner in Jerez, where Rossi booted Gibana off the track, and Marquez did the same thing to Lorenzo. And then secondly, with Rossi passing Stoner and running off the track in the process, and Marquez doing the exact same thing to Rossi at the Laguna Seca corkscrew. Another difference is that Valentino has historically taken less risks than Marc, especially in free practice sessions, where you only have to look at the number of times Marquez crashes in a season compared to Rossi. Marc's desire to continuously push and at times go past the limit has seen him accumulate more run-ins with other riders and therefore with race direction as well, compared to Rossi. So next, let's look at some of the arguments in favour of Rossi in the GOAT conversation. First of all, Rossi has managed to be successful on 2 separate manufacturers' motorcycles, whereas Marquez has so far only ridden the Honda. When Rossi initially came into MotoGP, he also rode for Honda, with whom he won his first 3 championships between 2001 and 2003. However, before the 2004 season, it became clear that Rossi no longer wanted to ride for Honda, as people had started to say that the main reason that Rossi was winning championships was because the bike was so good, as opposed to recognising Rossi's riding as the key factor. As a result, Rossi decided to move to Yamaha, a manufacturer that hadn't won a world title since 1992. Incredibly, Rossi won his very first race on the Yamaha in South Africa, becoming the first rider ever to win the last race of a season for one manufacturer and the first race of the next season for another manufacturer. Even though everyone had acknowledged that the factory Yamaha was an inferior motorcycle to the factory Honda, Rossi dispelled any doubts about his brilliance as a rider by winning back-to-back championships in his first 2 seasons with the Yamaha in 2004 and 2005, completing his transition into superstardom. Valentino has also had to adapt to 2 eras of MotoGP, as well as many different rule changes over the course of his career. When Rossi first came into the GP in 2000, everyone was riding a 500cc 2-stroke motorcycle. Rossi spent 2 seasons on board the 2-stroke, winning his first title on the Honda NSR 500. However, 2002 saw the advent of the 990cc 4-stroke motorcycles, and it was quickly discovered that these new motorcycles held a considerable advantage over the 500cc 2-strokes, resulting in every single team abandoning the 2-strokes by 2003. Rossi took no time whatsoever to get used to the new 4-strokes, immediately winning his third title on the Honda RC211V. In 2007, there was another rule change, meaning all bikes were now limited to a maximum engine size of 800cc. Once again, Rossi quickly adjusted to the new machinery, this time on board the Yamaha YZR-M1, as he won his 6th and 7th titles in 2008 and 2009. Then in 2013 came the latest rule changes, where the engine size was once again increased, this time to 1000cc, as it currently is, along with the addition of a knockout-style qualifying format. The new format meant that instead of a traditional 3 to 4 practice sessions followed by a qualifying session, there would now be a Q1 and Q2 session. Riders can automatically pass through into Q2 if they are able to post one of the 10 fastest lap times in the first 3 free practice sessions. Everyone who doesn't manage to do this goes into Q1, and the 2 fastest riders from Q1 then advance into Q2. In Q2, the 12 riders fight it out for the first 12 grid positions for the race. So, it's clear that Rossi has managed to adapt to many different situations and scenarios over the course of his career. Marquez, on the other hand, has had the benefit of no significant rule changes so far in his career. He has always ridden the 1000cc 4-stroke and has always had the current knockout qualifying format. Another big point in favour of Valentino Rossi is that he is the one and only rider in the history of the sport to have won a MotoGP World Championship on a satellite bike. In 2000 and 2001, Rossi did not have the luxury of riding for a factory team. He instead rode for the Nastro Azzurro Honda team, Honda's satellite team at the time. It is safe to say that winning a title on a satellite bike is extremely difficult, as a satellite rider does not have access to the latest machinery, components, or electronics that a factory rider does. As a result, if a satellite rider is able to compete with or outperform a factory rider, it speaks volumes about the skill level of the satellite rider. The fact that no one else in the history of the sport has managed to pull it off just goes to show what a phenomenal achievement it was from Rossi. Marquez, on the other hand, immediately came into the factory Repsol Honda team in his first year and has been a factory rider ever since, meaning he has never had to deal with not having full factory support. How Marquez would have fared had he arrived in MotoGP on a satellite bike is a question that we will unfortunately never know the answer to. However, given Marquez's immense skill level, it would not be too outlandish to suggest that he may well have fared rather well, especially considering how satellite riders are becoming more and more competitive every year as the performance gap between factory bikes and satellite bikes decreases. So, there are a fair few arguments in favour of Valentino remaining the GOAT, but what about the other side of the coin? Well, one of the main arguments in favour of Marquez eventually being considered the GOAT has to do with the level of competition that the two riders have faced over their careers. It could be argued that Valentino Rossi's toughest rivals only started to appear after he had already won 5 championships. If we were to look at the best riders that Rossi has raced against, they would have to be Marquez, Lorenzo, Stoner, Pedrosa and Biaggi. Now, of these 5, only one, Biaggi, was racing during the period that Rossi won his first 5 championships. Pedrosa, Stoner and Lorenzo only emerged when Rossi was fighting for championships number 6 and 7. Moreover, Biaggi and Sete Gibernau, Rossi's other main rival in the early 2000s, never even won a single MotoGP world title. On the other hand, the combined total of championships won by Marquez, Lorenzo and Stoner is 9, which would suggest that these 3 are considerably tougher opponents to beat than Biaggi or Gibernau. Therefore, there is sufficient evidence to make the case that had one of Marquez, Lorenzo or Stoner raced against Rossi in the early 2000s instead of Biaggi or Gibernau, he may not have necessarily won the same number of championships as he has done. Marquez, on the other hand, has had world champions to race against since day one, with just Rossi and Lorenzo themselves combining for 10 championships. In addition to those two, he has had to contend with Pedrosa every season, and more recently Viñales on the Yamaha and Andrea Dovizioso on board the most complete Ducati bike in recent memory. Also, given Viñales' young age, it looks increasingly likely that Marc will continue to face very stiff competition throughout his career, and it is unlikely that he will race on a grid that contains no other world champions. We can also look at the records of the riders Rossi faced while winning those first 5 titles versus the records of the riders Marc has faced. Rossi's 2 main rivals, Biaggi and Gibernau, won a combined total of 19 races between 2000 and 2005. Marquez's main rivals, Rossi, Lorenzo and Pedrosa, won a combined total of 40 races between 2013 and 2017, more than double the number that Rossi's rivals managed. This once again illustrates that Rossi's competition during his first 5 championship victories was not quite as vicious as what Marquez has faced so far in his career. Since 2007, which is when Rossi's toughest competition started to arrive, with Pedrosa, Stoner and Lorenzo all entering their primes, Valentino has only managed to win 2 out of a possible 11 available championship titles. Now, while looking at it in this way isn't necessarily fair, as Rossi's advanced age has certainly made it difficult for him to maintain the same levels of performance as he could in his younger years, it does still bring to light the possibility that had Rossi faced this level of competition earlier in his career, there isn't a guarantee that he would currently have 7 world championships. There is also a case to be made that the full MotoGP grid that Marquez has defeated is at a higher level than the full grids that Rossi had to defeat to win his championships. In 2016, when Marc won his 3rd title, there were 9 different race winners, a MotoGP record, and in 2017 there were 6 winners, with Marquez, Dovi, Lorenzo, Rossi, Pedrosa, Viñales, Petrucci, Crutchlow, Miller, Zarco, Iannone and Rins all capable of challenging for race wins. This recent trend of many different race winners looks set to continue well into the future. The likes of Crutchlow, Miller, Petrucci, Rins and Zarco have shown that it is very possible to win a MotoGP race on a satellite bike, perfectly illustrating that the fierce competition that now exists at the highest level is tougher than ever before. Meanwhile, during the seasons in which Rossi won his 7 titles, there were only 2 years in which there were 5 different race winners, with every other year there being only 4 or fewer. In addition, during this 2018 season, we have already had the closest top 15 finish in history, which happened at Assen, and even more recently at the Czech Grand Prix, Dovi, Lorenzo and Marquez recorded the closest top 3 finish in history. If we look at the difference in qualifying times of the 3 riders on the front row of every race 10 years ago versus the difference in qualifying times today, the results are quite striking. In 2008, the average difference between pole position and 3rd place was 0.472 seconds, which would seem pretty close. However, in 2018, the difference is just 0.212 seconds, meaning that qualifying in today's MotoGP is more than twice as close as it used to be 10 years ago.
Now, before any final judgments are made, there's another argument that is, if you like, in favour of both Rossi and Marquez, and rather than setting one apart from the other, it instead serves to set the 2 of them apart from all of their competition.
In all forms of motorsport, the machinery operated by either the driver or the rider inevitably plays a role in how competitive a racer is able to be over the course of a season and a career. Now, it is often stated that in car racing, for the driver to be competitive, 80% of the puzzle depends on the quality of the car and only 20% on the quality of the driver. In motorcycle racing, on the other hand, that figure is reversed, with the bike only accounting for about 20% and the rider being much more important, providing as much as 80% of the impetus. One of the main reasons for this is related to the differences between driving a car versus riding a motorcycle. In a car, the center of gravity is constant, as the driver is always sitting in the same position and only needs to press the 2 pedals and turn the steering wheel in order to control the car. The driver's body never needs to move at any stage. On the other hand, while riding a motorcycle, the center of gravity is constantly changing depending on the rider's body position, and it takes an extremely high level of skill for the rider to ensure that they adopt the perfect body position at the perfect time. Get it wrong, and the consequences could be disastrous, especially as there is no metal cage around you for protection in the event of a crash. However, 20% is still a significant amount, meaning it is always more difficult to win the championship on a bike that is not the best one on the grid. Rossi and Marquez both have plenty of experience winning races and championships on bikes that weren't the best bike of the season. We've already mentioned how Rossi won his first championship on a satellite bike, but apart from that, his 2 titles in 2004 and 2005 were on a Yamaha machine that still hadn't reached its full potential, and the factory Honda ridden by Biaggi was actually a better bike. As we now know, it didn't really make much difference, as Rossi won on the Yamaha anyway. As for Marquez, it can be said that his first 2 championships in 2013 and 2014 were won on the best bike, certainly in 2014, and in 2013 at least the equal best bike together with the Yamaha M1. However, his 2 most recent titles were not so simple. It's no secret how difficult the Honda was to ride in 2016-2017. You just have to look at the fact that Marquez has so greatly outperformed his fellow Honda riders over the last couple of seasons to realize how difficult a job it is to tame this monstrous motorcycle. It moves around all over the place under brakes, chatters in the corners, and bucks and weaves more than a rodeo bull on corner exit. In fact, at the beginning of 2016, the wild nature of the bike wasn't the only problem. On the final lap at Catalunya, while battling with Jorge Lorenzo, Marquez exited the final corner in front of Lorenzo and looked like he had sealed a memorable victory, only for the Yamaha to simply blitz past him on the home straight, which resulted in Lorenzo winning the race at the line, a result that should never have occurred had the Honda's corner exit acceleration been on par with the Yamaha's. At the beginning of 2017, the Yamaha M1 once again had the advantage over Marquez's Honda, with Maverick Viñales winning 3 of the first 5 races of the season. Later on in the year, even though it was clear that Honda had improved, the Ducati looked to have improved to an even greater degree, with Dovizioso winning 6 of the next 10 races, an incredible feat considering that prior to the 2017 season, he had only won 2 races in his entire MotoGP career. And it wasn't just Dovizioso performing well. Satellite Ducati riders like Petrucci and Bautista also started recording excellent results. What was most noticeable was the large acceleration and top speed deficit the Honda possessed compared to the Ducati. This made it extremely difficult for the Honda riders to overtake the Ducati riders, as every time they got close enough to consider throwing it up the inside, the Ducati would just blast away from them down one of the straights.
This helped Dovi to win 2 last lap clashes with Marquez over the course of the season, which was very surprising considering how good Marquez usually is during a dogfight.
So, with all things considered, to this point it seems like all the arguments for one of the riders over the other end up cancelling each other out to leave both riders on virtually equal footing.
But it's now important to consider what will eventually be seen as the most important factor in deciding which of these 2 riders will be remembered as the greatest of all time.
After all, there can only be one. It's clear that in terms of skill level, when Marquez's career is over, both riders will be virtually inseparable. So, in the end, in my opinion, it will come down to total MotoGP championship titles. In 20, 30 or 50 years, people may not necessarily remember all of the finer details. What they will definitely remember though is who was more victorious. Who was the one that swept all before him on more occasions than the other. With regards to this, while Rossi currently holds the numerical advantage with 7 titles to Marquez's 4, Marc has a big advantage when it comes to age. In 2019, Valentino will celebrate his 40th birthday, and it seems almost certain his days of winning MotoGP titles are behind him. With it virtually guaranteed that Rossi will retire with 7 GP titles, Marquez knows exactly what number he is chasing. At the age of just 25, he is already the youngest rider to 4 GP titles, and with him currently holding a 59-point advantage over the number 46 in the 2018 World Championship, it is looking increasingly likely that he will have 5 titles at the age of 25. Even if we're conservative about how many years Marc can remain in his prime, it would probably be safe to suggest that he can remain extremely competitive until the age of 30 or 31. That would give him 5 to 6 more seasons after this one in which to continue chasing Valentino's 7 titles. Now it is very possible that Marc could win 2 championships in 5 or 6 attempts, which would of course bring him level with Valentino. 2 questions then remain. Firstly, could he go one better and win an 8th title? And secondly, if he were to finish with 7, would that make him as good as Valentino, or better? To answer the first question, I believe that although there is a chance that Marquez wins 8 titles, it's going to be quite a tall order even for him. The main reason being, MotoGP is only continuing to get more and more competitive as the years go on, so for Marquez to win another 3 championships after this 2018 season is an extremely difficult task. However, if there's anyone that can prove me wrong, Marquez is that man. Ever since he arrived in 2013, he has made a career out of turning the seemingly impossible into the probable, and when he sets his mind to something, there's every chance that he'll be able to turn his dreams into reality. Finally, let's consider the second question. Does he actually need 8 championships to surpass Rossi, or will 7 suffice? Once again, and this is again just my opinion, and feel free to disagree with me if you so wish, but I believe that Marc does not need to win 8 titles to go down as the GOAT. I believe that 7 will be enough to put him over the edge. The main reason for this comes back to the competitiveness argument. I simply believe that Marc has already had to fight off slightly tougher opponents in order to win his first championships than was the case for Valentino during his early career. As elaborated on earlier in the video, that fearsome level of competition shows no sign of waning, and if Viñales becomes a MotoGP champion as most people have predicted, there is every chance that Marquez will spend his entire career in the GP class on the grid with at least one other world champion. The same cannot be said for Rossi. If Marc does go on to win 8 or more, then I believe there is absolutely no doubt he is the GOAT, and I think it would be very, very difficult to dispute his status as the greatest if he were to achieve such an astonishing feat. However, what we must remember is that this is all still speculation. After all, Marquez is still only raced in the GP class for 5 seasons as opposed to Rossi's 18. While none of us can predict what the future truly holds, what seems certain is that as long as we have riders like Valentino Rossi and Marc Marquez around, the MotoGP World Championship will remain one of the most thrilling spectacles in the world. As for Rossi and Marquez, we should feel blessed by the racing gods that we've been allowed to walk this earth at a time in which we can witness the two of them lining up side by side on the same grid. It seems clear that when the pair finally decide that their careers have run their course, they will both go down not only as two of the greatest motorcycle racers of all time, but as two of the greatest athletes of any gender in any sport at any time. Thank you so much for watching. I had a lot of fun making this video, and if you enjoyed it, stick around. Like, subscribe for more MotoGP discussion coming your way very shortly.